I am Etta Miller, 32 years old, with a career as an art teacher that brings me joy, but never seems to impress my family. My brother Michael has always been the golden child, while I remained the perpetual disappointment. When I arrived at my parents' annual gathering, I expected the usual subtle jabs about my life choices. Instead, they dropped a bombshell announcement about their $1.2 million estate that left me shattered. If you are watching this right now, please let me know where you are from in the comments. Hit that like button, and subscribe as I share how my grandmother changed everything that day. Growing up in the Miller family meant living in the shadow of my brother Michael. From the moment he brought home his first perfect report card in elementary school, my parents decided he was destined for greatness. Michael excelled at everything he touched. He was valedictorian, captain of the swim team, and president of the debate club. Meanwhile, I struggled to find my place. Always a solid B student, but never exceptional in the ways that seemed to matter to Robert and Barbara Miller. Michael went on to graduate from an Ivy League university with honors before landing a prestigious position at a Wall Street investment firm. His trajectory was exactly what my parents had envisioned for their children. His success in the financial world reinforced their belief that money and status were the ultimate measures of achievement. I took a different path. Throughout high school, I drifted between activities, never quite finding my niche, until junior year, when I discovered the art room. Mrs. Patterson, my art teacher, recognized something in me that no one else had bothered to look for. Under her guidance, I developed a passion for painting and sculpture that gave me purpose and joy. When I announced my intention to pursue an art degree, my father scoffed. "Art is a hobby, Etta, not a career." My mother was slightly more diplomatic but equally dismissive. "Darling, that sounds lovely, but how will you support yourself?" They reluctantly paid for my education at a state university rather than the private art school I had dreamed of attending. After graduation, I secured a position teaching art at a public high school. I loved working with students, especially those who, like me, found solace and self-expression in creativity. I developed innovative programs that engaged even the most reluctant participants. My principal commended my work, and several of my students went on to win regional art competitions. But whenever I shared these accomplishments with my parents, they would nod politely before changing the subject to Michael's latest bonus or promotion. The only person who ever truly supported my artistic pursuits was my grandmother Eleanor. Unlike her daughter Barbara, Grandma Eleanor saw value in creative expression. She displayed my artwork proudly in her home and always asked thoughtful questions about my teaching methods. "You are helping those children find their voices," she would tell me. "That is a precious gift." The annual Miller family gathering was a tradition that dated back to my childhood. Each summer, extended family would converge on my parents' sprawling colonial home in Connecticut for a weekend of forced bonding and thinly veiled competition. This year was no different. As I pulled into the circular driveway, my modest sedan looking out of place among the luxury vehicles already parked there. The house was exactly as I remembered. 4 white columns framed the entrance, and manicured gardens stretched in all directions. It was a monument to my parents' success and, by extension, a reminder of what they considered important in life. Inside, the usual suspects had already arrived. My brother Michael was holding court in the living room, regaling our Uncle Frederick with tales from the financial sector. His wife Stephanie stood nearby, perfectly coiffed and wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly salary. My cousin Megan was helping my mother arrange flowers in the dining room while Aunt Judith supervised. And there, sitting quietly in the corner with a book, was Grandma Eleanor, who brightened visibly when she saw me enter. "There she is," Grandma called out, setting aside her reading. "My favorite artist has arrived." My mother looked up from her flower arranging. "Etta," finally. "We were beginning to wonder if you would make it." Her tone suggested she would not have been particularly disappointed if I had not. "Traffic was heavy," I explained, accepting her perfunctory cheek kiss. "The gallery opening ran later than expected." "Gallery opening?" My father had emerged from his study, martini in hand. "Are you showing your work somewhere?" For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope that he was genuinely interested. Not my work. I organized an exhibition for my students. The community response was amazing. We raised over $10,000 for the school's art program. That is nice, he said, already looking past me toward Michael. Your brother just closed a $40 million deal for his firm. $40 million? Can you imagine? And just like that, the pattern reasserted itself. My small victory diminished by comparison to Michael's grand accomplishment. Dinner was an elaborate affair, served on my mother's best china. The conversation flowed around me as I pushed food around my plate. Michael discussed market trends. Stephanie mentioned their plans to renovate their Manhattan apartment. Uncle Frederick debated tax strategies with my father. Aunt Judith bragged about her recent Mediterranean cruise. I caught Grandma Eleanor watching me with concern in her eyes. She had always been perceptive about the family dynamics. I gave her a small smile to indicate I was fine, though we both knew that was not entirely true. As dessert was served, I decided to share my news. I had developed a community art program that had received recognition from the State Board of Education. Several other districts were looking to implement my curriculum. It was the most significant professional achievement of my career so far, and despite years of disappointment, part of me still hoped my parents might finally see value in my work. That sounds like a lot of effort for very little return, my father commented after I finished explaining the program. You always did like to take the hard road, Etta. Not everyone measures returns solely in dollars, Robert, Grandma Eleanor interjected, giving him a pointed look. My mother jumped in to smooth over the tension. Etta has always been so creative. Remember those little clay sculptures she used to make? We still have some in the attic somewhere. The conversation moved on, and I retreated into silence again. Little did I know that the real bombshell was yet to come. After dinner, my father tapped his crystal glass with a silver spoon, commanding attention in the way he had done throughout my childhood. The sharp ringing sound still had the power to straighten my posture automatically. Barbara and I have an announcement to make, he declared, standing at the head of the table with my mother at his side. They exchanged a look that I could not quite interpret. We have been doing some estate planning recently. My Aunt Judith perked up. Is everything all right, Robert? Perfect health, thank you, my father assured her with a wave of his hand. But at our age, it is important to have affairs in order. Barbara and I have decided that rather than waiting until we are gone, we would like to distribute some of our assets now, while we can see them put to good use. A murmur of interest rippled around the table. My cousin Megan caught my eye and raised her eyebrows slightly. As you all know, my father continued, we have been fortunate in our investments over the years. We find ourselves in a position to make a significant contribution to the next generation. My mother nodded, her perfectly highlighted bob bouncing slightly. We have given this a great deal of thought and prayer. I felt a strange sensation in my stomach, a mixture of hope and dread. Was this finally the moment my parents would recognize my worth? Perhaps they had seen the value in my work with students and wanted to support the expansion of my program. I straightened in my chair, allowing myself to imagine their approval for the first time in years. We have decided, my father announced, his voice swelling with pride, to transfer $1.2 million to Michael, effective immediately. The room fell silent for a moment before my father added, all of it. I blinked, certain I had misheard. All of it? My brain struggled to process the words. My father continued, oblivious to my shock. Michael has demonstrated exceptional financial acumen throughout his career. We know he will steward these resources wisely, growing them for future generations of millers. Michael himself looked somewhat uncomfortable, glancing at me with an expression that might have been sympathy or embarrassment. Dad, I appreciate this, but nonsense, my father cut him off. You have earned our confidence. Your investment strategies have consistently outperformed the market. This is the logical decision. It was then that my mother turned to look directly at me, her expression a mixture of dismissal and something that might have been pity. Etta, we considered including you, but frankly, your life choices have not demonstrated financial responsibility. What are you talking about? I managed to ask, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I have never asked you for money. I pay my bills. I have savings. My father scoffed. Teaching art at a public school is hardly the path to financial security. You live in a rented apartment. You drive a 10-year-old car. Because those things are not my priorities, I protested, feeling heat rise to my face. Exactly our point, my mother said, as if I had proven their case for them. You are a failure when it comes to building wealth. Handle your own life however you want. But we will not throw good money after bad. The word failure hung in the air like poison gas. I had been called many things by my parents over the years. Impractical, dreamy, unfocused. But never, until this moment, had they labeled me a failure to my face, and certainly never in front of the entire family. I looked around the table, desperate for someone to speak up. Uncle Frederick studied his wineglass with sudden interest. Aunt Judith began fussing with her napkin. Cousin Megan looked genuinely distressed, but remained silent. Stephanie was whispering something to Michael, who had the grace to appear conflicted. I see, I finally said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Thank you for making your opinion of me so clear. Now, Etta, my mother said in the tone she had always used when I was being dramatic as a child. There is no need to make a scene. This is a celebration for Michael. Congratulations, Michael, I said automatically, decades of enforced politeness taking over. That is quite a vote of confidence. He would not meet my eyes. Thanks, Etta. I did not know they were planning this. An awkward silence descended on the dining room. I could feel tears threatening, but refused to give my parents the satisfaction of seeing me cry. I had spent a lifetime trying to earn their approval, and in one cruel moment, they had made it abundantly clear that would never happen. Aunt Judith cleared her throat. Barbara, that centerpiece is lovely. Did you arrange it yourself, or did you use that florist in town? I was simultaneously grateful for and insulted by her clumsy attempt to change the subject. Was my humiliation so uncomfortable that it needed to be papered over with talk of flower arrangements? As the conversation artificially resumed around me, I sat frozen in my chair. The familiar feelings of inadequacy that had followed me since childhood crashed over me in waves. All those years of telling myself that my parents' approval did not matter, that I had built a life I could be proud of, regardless of their opinions, suddenly seemed like an elaborate self-deception. Their words had cut straight through my carefully constructed defenses to the wounded child who still lived inside me. My father was now discussing potential investment strategies with Michael, their excitement building as they explored possibilities. My mother was nodding along, occasionally contributing a thought or question that demonstrated she was far more financially literate than she had ever bothered to be about my career. I had never felt more invisible at that table, and considering my history with this family, that was saying something. Excuse me, I managed to say, pushing back from the table. I need to use the restroom. No one acknowledged my departure, except Grandma Eleanor, whose concerned eyes followed me as I made my escape. Once safely behind the locked bathroom door, I gripped the marble countertop and stared at my reflection in the ornate mirror. My face was pale, my eyes wide with shock. You are not a failure, I whispered to myself, but the word sounded hollow, even to my own ears. In the privacy of the bathroom, memories flooded back unbidden. I was 10 years old, bringing home an art project that had won a school prize, only to have my father glance at it and ask where Michael was. I was 16, performing a piano solo at a recital, while my parents checked their watches repeatedly, anxious to leave for Michael's debate tournament. I was 22, graduating with honors with my art education degree, hearing my mother tell relatives I was just teaching while Michael was building a career. I had spent years in therapy working through these memories, learning to validate my own choices and find worth in my own definition of success. And yet, in a single evening, my parents had managed to unravel much of that hard work with a few carefully chosen words. I splashed cold water on my face, careful not to smudge my makeup. Breaking down completely would only give them more evidence for their narrative that I was emotionally unstable compared to my practical, level-headed brother. Taking a deep breath, I squared my shoulders and unlocked the door. I could do this. I could make it through the rest of this excruciating evening with my dignity intact. Tomorrow I would return to my apartment, to my students, to the life I had built that brought me genuine satisfaction if not material wealth. As I made my way back to the dining room, I overheard my father's voice coming from his study, where the door stood slightly ajar. "Of course we made the right decision, Frederick," he was saying to my uncle. "Etta has never shown any aptitude for financial matters. That money would be wasted on art supplies and charitable projects with no return. She seems to be doing well in her teaching career," my uncle replied, his tone neutral. My father scoffed. "Teaching art is hardly a career. It is a hobby she gets paid for. Michael will grow that 1.2 million into something substantial. That is what building a legacy looks like." I forced myself to walk past the door before I could hear more. My father's dismissal of my entire professional life stung freshly. Teaching was not just a job to me, it was a calling. I had seen firsthand how art education could transform students' lives, giving them confidence and a means of expression they had never found elsewhere. In the living room, Michael approached me cautiously, a tumbler of scotch in his hand. "Etta, I want you to know, I had no idea they were planning this." I nodded stiffly. "I believe you. I could talk to them," he offered, though his tone lacked conviction. "Tell them they should reconsider." "Would you?" I asked, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Would you really risk disappointing them for my sake?" He looked away, answering my question without words. Michael had spent his entire life being the perfect son. He was not about to jeopardize that status now. "That is what I thought," I said quietly. "I could help you out sometimes," he suggested, "if you need anything." The offer, though probably well-intentioned, only twisted the knife further. "I do not need your charity, Michael. Contrary to what Mom and Dad think, I am not destitute. I live within my means." "I know that," he said quickly. "I just meant—" "I know what you meant," I cut him off. "But accepting handouts from you would only reinforce their narrative that I cannot take care of myself." He nodded, looking relieved to be let off the hook. "For what it is worth, I think what you do is important. Those kids are lucky to have you as a teacher." The words should have been comforting, but they felt like too little, too late. Where was this support when our parents were actively belittling my career choices over the years? My heart was racing, and I felt slightly nauseated. The room seemed too warm, the conversations around me too loud. I contemplated simply leaving, getting in my car, and driving back to my apartment 3 hours away, but something kept me rooted in place. Perhaps it was stubborn pride, or perhaps it was the knowledge that fleeing would only confirm my parents' low opinion of me. Cousin Megan sidled up next to me, offering a glass of wine. "That was brutal," she said in a low voice. "Are you okay?" I accepted the wine gratefully. "I have been better. Your parents can be." She hesitated, searching for a diplomatic word. "Cruel?" I suggested. She winced. I was going to say traditional, but yes, that works too. We stood in silence for a moment, watching the family interact. My mother was showing Stephanie her collection of porcelain figurines, while Aunt Judith examined a new painting my parents had acquired. The scene was so ordinary, as if the bombshell announcement and my subsequent humiliation had never occurred. "Remember when you got that art scholarship to the summer program at Rhode Island School of Design?" Megan asked suddenly. I nodded. It had been a highly competitive program, and being accepted had felt like validation of my talents. "Your mom told everyone it was just because they needed to fill diversity quotas," Megan said. I remember thinking how unfair that was, especially since I had seen your portfolio. "You were really good, Etta." "You still are." Her words unlocked another painful memory. When I had excitedly shared the news of my scholarship, my mother had smiled tightly and said, "How nice for you, dear. I suppose they need to fill their classes somehow." My father had been even more direct. "Lucky break, but do not let it give you unrealistic ideas about your future." I had gone to the program anyway and had thrived there, but their dismissal had cast a shadow over what should have been a purely joyful experience. Looking around the room now, I felt a profound sense of isolation. These people were my family by blood, but with the exception of Grandma Eleanor, and perhaps Megan, none of them had ever really seen me. They had decided who I was supposed to be long ago, and when I failed to fulfill that predetermined role, they had simply written me off as a disappointment. The weight of this realization settled heavily on my shoulders. I took a large sip of wine, trying to dull the ache in my chest. I noticed Grandma Eleanor watching the room with narrowed eyes from her favorite armchair. Unlike the rest of the family, who seemed determined to move past the awkwardness of the announcement, she appeared to be deep in thought, observing each interaction with careful attention. When my father called everyone back to the living room for coffee and dessert, making a point of pouring Michael a special 30-year-old port to celebrate his good fortune, something shifted in Grandma Eleanor's expression. She set down her teacup with a decisive clink and slowly rose to her feet. At 87, my grandmother was still an imposing presence. Her posture was erect, her silver hair elegantly styled, and her gaze sharp as ever. As she stood, the room gradually fell silent. Even my father, who typically commanded every gathering, seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen. "Now it is my turn," Grandma Eleanor announced, her voice clear and strong despite her age. My mother looked confused. "Your turn for what, Mother?" "My turn to speak," Eleanor replied firmly. "I have sat quietly for too many years, watching this family dynamic play out. Tonight, I have reached my limit." The tension in the room was immediate and palpable. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Eleanor, perhaps this is not the appropriate time." "On the contrary, Robert," she cut him off. "Your announcement has made this precisely the appropriate time. I have watched how you and Barbara have treated Etta for her entire life, and I have kept my peace out of respect for your role as her parents. That ends tonight." I felt a surge of anxiety, mixed with something that might have been hope. Never had anyone in the family directly confronted my parents about their treatment of me. Grandma Eleanor turned to look at me directly. "Etta, I want you to know that I see you. I have always seen you. Your passion for art, your dedication to your students, the way you light up when you talk about your work. These things are valuable beyond measure." Tears sprang to my eyes before I could stop them. To be truly seen, to have my life choices validated by someone in this family, was overwhelming. "Mother, we appreciate that you are fond of Etta," my mother began, her tone placating. "But Robert and I have made our decision based on practical considerations." "Practical?" Grandma Eleanor repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Let me tell you what is practical, Barbara. Recognizing genuine talent and nurturing it, supporting both your children equally, measuring success by more than just financial metrics." She took a step toward the center of the room, commanding everyone's attention. "What none of you know is that before I married Etta's grandfather, I was an artist myself." This revelation stunned me. In all our conversations about art, Grandma Eleanor had never mentioned this. "I had genuine talent," she continued. "My paintings were beginning to receive recognition in local galleries. But when I met Harold, his family made it clear that being an artist was not a suitable occupation for the wife of a businessman. So I set aside my brushes and paints. I became the society wife they wanted me to be." Her eyes grew distant for a moment. I told myself it was a worthwhile sacrifice for love. But there has always been a hole in my life where my art should have been. When I see Etta pursuing her passion despite your constant disapproval, Robert and Barbara, I see the courage I wished I had possessed at her age. My father cleared his throat. "That is a touching story, Eleanor, but it does not change the fact that Michael has demonstrated superior financial judgment." "I am not finished," Grandma Eleanor said sharply. "What you also do not know is that Harold and I had our own financial arrangements. While he was alive, I allowed him to manage our affairs, as was customary for his generation. But after his death, I educated myself. I took control of my inheritance and made my own investment decisions." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Those investments, along with Harold's life insurance that was separate from the family business, have grown substantially over the past 20 years. My estate is currently valued at $3.4 million. A shocked murmur ran through the room. No one, not even my mother, had known the extent of Grandma Eleanor's wealth. "Mother, why did you never tell us?" my mother asked, looking genuinely surprised. "Because, Barbara, I wanted to observe how you and Robert would treat your children without the influence of my money," she replied simply. "And I have observed quite enough." Grandma Eleanor turned to me again. "Etta, I have amended my will. I am allocating $2.5 million to you, effective immediately," I gasped, unable to process what I was hearing. "Grandma, no, I cannot." She held up a hand to silence my protest. "The money comes with two stipulations. First, $1 million will be used to establish the art school you have always dreamed of creating. Second, the remaining $1.5 million will be yours to use as you see fit, whether for your community art program or your personal security." My parents looked thunderstruck. My father's face had gone pale, while my mother's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. "The remaining $900,000 will be divided between charitable causes that support arts education in underserved communities," Grandma Eleanor continued. "I have already consulted with my attorney, and the paperwork is prepared." Michael was the first to recover. "Grandma, that is incredibly generous to Etta. She deserves it." I was surprised by his apparent sincerity. Perhaps there was more complexity to my brother than I had allowed myself to see. "Eleanor," my father finally managed to say, "surely you want to reconsider this. Etta has no experience managing that kind of money. It would be more prudent to—" "To what, Robert?" Grandma Eleanor challenged. "To give it to someone who already has more than enough? To reinforce your favoritism? Number." "My decision is made." She turned to address the entire room. "True value is not measured by the size of one's bank account or the prestige of one's address. It is measured by the lives we touch, the passion we pursue, and the courage we show in the face of adversity. By those metrics, Etta is the most successful person in this room." For the first time in my life, I saw my father rendered completely speechless. My mother looked as though she might faint. Grandma Eleanor came to stand beside me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "Your parents may not see your worth, my dear, but I do. And now you will have the resources to show the world what you are truly capable of achieving." In that moment, everything shifted. The power dynamic that had defined my family for decades was suddenly, irrevocably altered. And though I was still processing the shock of it all, beneath the confusion was a growing sense of vindication and possibility. The silence that followed Grandma Eleanor's announcement was broken by the sound of my father's crystal tumbler being set down forcefully on the side table. "This is absurd," he finally declared, his composure returning along with his color. "Eleanor, you cannot possibly think this is a responsible financial decision. On the contrary," my grandmother replied coolly, "I consider it the most responsible decision I have made in years. Investing in Etta's vision and talent will yield returns far beyond monetary measurement." My mother had recovered enough to join the fray. "Mother, please reconsider. We only want what is best for both our children. Etta is not equipped to handle this kind of money." "And why would that be, Barbara?" Grandma Eleanor asked pointedly. "Could it be because you and Robert never bothered to teach her about finances the way you did Michael? Could it be because you always assumed she would amount to nothing more than a hobbyist?" I found my voice at last. "I am standing right here. Please stop talking about me as if I am not in the room." All eyes turned to me, some surprised, as if they had indeed forgotten my presence despite being the subject of discussion. "I may not have Michael's financial expertise," I continued, surprising myself with my steadiness, "but I am not financially illiterate. I manage my classroom budget with care. I secured grants for my community program. I live within my means and save for retirement." I turned to face my parents directly. The problem was never that I could not handle money. The problem was that you decided long ago that my interests and talents had no value. My father scoffed. That is unfair, Etta. We supported your education. You paid for it. I corrected him. That is not the same as supporting it. You made it clear at every turn that you considered my choices disappointing. We wanted security for you, my mother insisted. Is that so wrong? Wanting security for your child is not wrong, I acknowledged. But making them feel like a failure for choosing fulfillment over Wealth Island. Do you have any idea how many times I have second-guessed myself because of your disapproval? How many nights I have lain awake wondering if I made a terrible mistake by not becoming an accountant or a lawyer or whatever profession you deemed worthy? Years of suppressed emotions were finally finding release. My hands were shaking, but my voice remained firm. The worst part is that I love my life. I love teaching. I love seeing my students discover their creative voices. I love knowing that I am making a difference in their lives. But I have never been able to fully embrace that joy, because your disapproval has always cast a shadow over my choices. Michael stepped forward, his expression troubled. Etta, I had no idea you felt this way. I gave him a sad smile. How could you? We never talk about real things, Michael. We exchange pleasantries at family gatherings. We send birthday cards. But when was the last time we had an actual conversation about our lives? He had no answer for that. My father, always uncomfortable with emotional confrontations, attempted to regain control of the situation. Eleanor, regardless of Etta's feelings, this decision seems impulsive. I suggest we all take some time to consider the implications before any money changes hands. There is nothing impulsive about it, Grandma Eleanor replied firmly. I have been watching this family dynamic for 32 years. I have seen how Etta's accomplishments have been minimized while Michael's have been celebrated. I have made my decision with clear eyes and full awareness of its implications. Aunt Judith, who had been silent throughout most of the evening, unexpectedly spoke up. Robert, Barbara, I have to say that Eleanor has a point. I have noticed over the years how differently you treat your children. My parents looked betrayed by this new source of criticism. Even Frederick has commented on it, Judith continued, glancing at her husband, who nodded reluctantly. You both raised 2 successful children, Uncle Frederick said carefully. But you only seem to recognize one kind of success. Cousin Megan joined in. It is true, Aunt Barbara. The family has noticed. At last year's Christmas gathering, you spent 20 minutes telling everyone about Michael's promotion, but changed the subject when Etta mentioned her students winning that regional art competition. I was stunned by this unexpected support. All these years, I had assumed no one else had noticed the disparity in how my parents treated us. To discover that it had been obvious to the extended family was both validating and painful. My mother's eyes filled with tears, though whether from genuine remorse or embarrassment at being called out, I could not tell. We never meant to make Etta feel less valued. We only wanted what was best for her. What you wanted, I said quietly, was for me to be someone I am not. Michael, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly addressed our parents. Dad, Mom, I think you owe Etta an apology. I never realized how much you favored me, because it was just normal to me. But hearing everyone else point it out, I can see it now. My father looked as though he had been struck. The idea that he might need to apologize seemed foreign to him. We have nothing to apologize for. Everything we did was out of love for both of you. Love should not be conditional, Grandma Eleanor said firmly. It should not depend on career choices or income potential. The evening had completely unraveled. What had begun as a celebration of Michael's windfall had transformed into a family reckoning decades in the making. People began to make awkward excuses to leave. Aunt Judith and Uncle Frederick cited the long drive home. Cousin Megan mentioned an early morning commitment the next day. As the gathering broke up in disarray, I felt simultaneously drained and exhilarated. For the first time in my life, I had stood up to my parents. I had named the dynamic that had shaped my existence for as long as I could remember. Whether or not they acknowledged it, I had spoken my truth. Grandma Eleanor approached me as the others were gathering their belongings. "Come walk with me in the garden," she said softly, taking my arm. We slipped out through the French doors onto the terrace. The summer evening was warm, the garden fragrant with roses and jasmine. We followed the stone path to a small bench, partially hidden by ornamental grasses. "I am sorry I never told you about my own artistic past," Grandma Eleanor said once we were seated. "I thought it might influence your choices, and I wanted you to find your own path." "I wish I had known," I admitted. "It would have helped to know someone else in the family understood." She patted my hand. "I understood more than you know. I recognized your talent the first time you showed me your drawings when you were just 7 years old. You had a natural eye for composition that cannot be taught." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, listening to the chorus of crickets. "Are you sure about the money, Grandma?" I finally asked. "It is an enormous sum, more certain than I have been about anything in a very long time," she replied firmly. "My only regret is that I did not do this sooner. Perhaps it would have spared you years of self-doubt." "It is not too late," I said, squeezing her hand. "This changes everything. Remember," she said, her voice taking on a tone of gentle warning, "money does not solve all problems. In fact, it often creates new ones. People will treat you differently. Some will try to take advantage. Others will resent your good fortune. Even my own family," I observed wryly. "Especially family," she agreed. "But money also creates freedom and opportunity when used wisely. You have vision, Etta. Now you will have the means to bring that vision to life." As we sat together in the gathering darkness, I felt a sense of peace stealing over me. The hurt inflicted by my parents was still raw, but Grandma Eleanor's faith in me was a balm to that wound. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine what might be possible with the resources to pursue my dreams without constraint. 3 months passed in a whirlwind of activity. With Grandma Eleanor's guidance, I assembled a team of financial advisors, attorneys, and educational consultants to help me navigate my new circumstances. The paperwork, transferring $2.5 million to my name, was finalized, and I began the process of establishing the Etta Miller Community Arts Center in a formerly abandoned building on the edge of my city's arts district. The building itself was a find. A 100-year-old former warehouse with soaring ceilings, massive windows, and good bones. It needed extensive renovation, but I could see its potential the moment I walked through the door. This space would provide studios for working artists, classrooms for students of all ages, and gallery space for exhibitions. What amazed me most was how quickly doors began to open once I had resources behind my vision. City officials who had previously ignored my proposals for arts programming suddenly returned my calls. Grant applications that had languished in review for months were expedited. Artists and educators I admired expressed interest in collaborating. I hired a contractor specializing in adaptive reuse of historic buildings and worked closely with him to design a space that was both beautiful and functional. The ground floor would house the gallery and community classrooms. The second floor would contain private studios that could be rented at affordable rates by working artists. The top floor would be dedicated to advanced instruction and special programs. Throughout the planning and early construction phases, Grandma Eleanor was my most enthusiastic supporter. Despite her age, she visited the site regularly, offering suggestions and sharing in my excitement as walls came down and new possibilities emerged. My relationship with my parents, however, remained strained. After the disastrous family gathering, they had retreated into cool formality. My mother called once to inform me that they would be spending the holidays in Europe this year. My father did not call at all. Surprisingly, it was Michael who reached out. He invited me to lunch at a casual restaurant halfway between our homes, away from the charged atmosphere of our parents' house. "This place looks amazing," he said as we walked through the partially renovated building after lunch. Construction workers were installing new electrical systems, and the smell of fresh paint filled the air. "It will be," I agreed, unable to keep the pride from my voice. "We are on track to open the first phase in 2 months." Michael stopped in the center of what would become the main gallery, looking up at the skylight we had uncovered during demolition. "I have been thinking a lot about that night at Mom and Dad's," he said suddenly. I waited, unsure where this was going. "I always knew they favored me," he admitted, "but I told myself it was because I was doing what they wanted, following the path they approved of. I never considered that they might actually value me more as a person." "It was not your fault," I said, surprised to realize I meant it. "You were just being yourself." "But I never stood up for you," he replied, meeting my eyes directly. "All those times they dismissed your accomplishments or belittled your choices." I said nothing. "I was so afraid of losing their approval that I became complicit in their treatment of you." His honesty was unexpected and disarming. "We were both trapped in the roles they assigned us," I said. "You as the golden child, me as the disappointment." "For what it is worth," Michael said, "I always envied your courage. You followed your passion despite their disapproval. I have been living the life they wanted for me, and while I am good at it, I have often wondered if I would have chosen it for myself." This confession stunned me. I had always seen Michael as completely aligned with our parents' values. The idea that he might have his own doubts had never occurred to me. "What would you have chosen instead?" I asked. He gave a rueful smile. "That is the sad part. I have been playing the role for so long, I am not sure I know anymore. But watching you create all this has made me think about what actually matters to me beyond just making money." As we continued the tour, Michael asked thoughtful questions about the programs I plan to offer and the communities I hope to serve. For the first time in our adult lives, we were having a real conversation, seeing each other as complex individuals rather than the simplified characters in our family drama. Before he left, Michael hesitated, then said, "Mom and Dad have been reaching out more since that night. I think they are worried about losing their connection to me now that the family dynamic has shifted." "Are you still accepting their money?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I told them I would only accept it if they made an equal provision for you," he replied. "They were not happy about that." I was touched by this unexpected show of solidarity. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," he said simply. "It was long overdue." In the weeks that followed, I received a stiff email from my father, indicating that they had reconsidered and would be setting aside an equal amount for me in their will. It was not exactly a warm reconciliation, but it was an acknowledgement of sorts. My relationship with Grandma Eleanor, meanwhile, deepened into something approaching a partnership. She shared stories of her brief career as an artist, showing me yellowed newspaper clippings of exhibitions from the late 1940s. She introduced me to financial concepts that had never been part of my education, teaching me to read balance sheets and understand investment strategies. "Your grandfather was a good man," she told me one afternoon, as we reviewed proposals from artists applying for studio space. "But he was a product of his time. He could not imagine a woman pursuing a serious career in the arts." "Do you regret giving it up?" I asked. She considered the question carefully. "I regret not finding a way to keep it in my life, even privately. By the time my children were grown, and I might have returned to it, I had convinced myself it was too late." Do not make that mistake, Etta. Do not let anyone convince you to set aside what brings you joy. As the opening day of the art center approached, I found myself working 18-hour days, exhilarated despite the exhaustion. The community response exceeded my wildest expectations. Local schools arranged field trips. Neighborhood organizations proposed collaborations. Artists from across the region submitted work for the inaugural exhibition. The night before the grand opening, I stood alone in the completed gallery, surrounded by the artwork we had selected. The lights adjusted to illuminate each piece perfectly. The space I had imagined for so long was finally real. And more importantly, I was finally free of the need for my parents' approval. I had found my own measure of success, on my own terms. 1 year after Grandma Eleanor's dramatic intervention at the family gathering, the Etta Miller Community Art Center celebrated its first anniversary with an exhibition of student work from our inaugural programs. The main gallery was filled with paintings, sculptures, and mixed media pieces created by participants ranging in age from 7 to 77. The center had exceeded even my optimistic projections. We had served over 3,000 community members through classes, workshops, and exhibitions. 15 artists in residence occupied the studio spaces, creating vibrant work and mentoring younger artists. Our scholarship program had enabled dozens of talented students from disadvantaged backgrounds to receive high-quality instruction. More surprising than the center's success was the gradual thawing in my relationship with my parents. The process had been painful at first. After months of minimal contact, my mother had called to ask if they could visit the center once it was completed. "We want to see what you have created," she said, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Their first visit had been awkward. My father examined the building with the critical eye of someone accustomed to evaluating investments, noting the quality of the renovations and asking about operating costs. My mother moved through the gallery spaces with visible discomfort, clearly out of her element among the contemporary artwork. But they came, and that was something, and they returned for the major exhibition openings, gradually becoming more at ease in this world I had created. They were never effusive in their praise, but I began to detect a subtle shift in their perspective. My father actually complimented the business model I had developed to make the center sustainable long-term. My mother expressed genuine interest in the educational programs for children. We were learning, slowly and imperfectly, to rebuild our relationship on new terms. I no longer sought their approval with the desperation of my younger self. They were beginning to see me through new eyes, not as the disappointment who had rejected their values, but as a capable woman who had created something meaningful. For the anniversary celebration, I had invited the entire family. To my surprise, everyone came. Aunt Judith and Uncle Frederick toured the studios with sincere interest. Cousin Megan brought friends who purchased several pieces from our resident artists. Michael arrived with a generous donation to fund an expansion of our scholarship program. And at the center of it all was Grandma Eleanor, now 88, moving through the galleries with regal grace, accepting congratulations as if the center's success was her own personal triumph. In many ways, it was. During a quiet moment in the festivities, she pulled me aside. "I have something to show you," she said, leading me to a small office we had set up for her visits. From her handbag, she withdrew a manila envelope. Inside was a stack of yellowed documents. "These belong to your great-grandmother," she explained. "I found them when I was going through some old storage boxes." I carefully examined the contents. They were letters, dating back to the 1920s, written by my great-grandmother to her sister. In them, she described her passion for painting and her frustration at being forced to abandon it after marriage. "It seems artistic talent runs in the female line of our family," Grandma Eleanor said. "3 generations of women who were discouraged from pursuing their creative gifts. You are the one who broke the pattern, Etta." The realization was both heartbreaking and empowering. I thought of all the women throughout history whose talents had been suppressed or diverted, whose potential contributions to the world had been lost because they were told their aspirations were impractical or inappropriate. "This is why the center matters," I said, carefully returning the letters to their envelope. "We are creating a space where talent can be nurtured, regardless of gender or background or economic status." "You have created something far more valuable than wealth," Grandma Eleanor agreed. "You have created opportunity." Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I found myself standing with my parents near a display of artwork created by our youngest students. A series of vibrant paintings lined the wall, each one accompanied by a statement from the child artist explaining their work. "I never understood," my father said suddenly, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "All those years, I never understood what drove you to teach art, rather than pursue something more conventional." "I know," I replied simply, "but seeing these children's work, reading their words about what art means to them," he gestured toward the display. "I begin to see why it matters to you." It was not exactly an apology, but coming from my father, it was a significant concession. My mother touched my arm lightly, her eyes communicating what she struggled to put into words. There was regret there, and perhaps a tentative request for forgiveness. The healing process with my family would be long and uneven. There would be setbacks and old patterns that reemerged. But standing in the gallery, surrounded by the tangible results of my vision, I felt a sense of peace I had never expected to find. The money that had initially seemed like the most important aspect of Grandma Eleanor's gift had ultimately been the least significant part. The true gift had been the opportunity to discover my own strength, to build something meaningful on my own terms, and to begin the process of genuine reconciliation with my family. As I looked around at the community that had formed around the center, I realized that success could be measured in so many ways beyond financial wealth. It could be measured in the confidence of a child discovering their creative voice for the first time. It could be measured in the gratitude of an elderly participant, finding new purpose through art after retirement. It could be measured in the vibrant collaborations forming between artists who might never have met otherwise. Grandma Eleanor had been right. The greatest wealth came not from accumulation, but from creation, connection, and contribution. By following my own path, despite years of disapproval, I had found a fulfillment that no amount of money could have provided. The journey had been painful at times, but the wounds had ultimately led to growth and transformation. The rejection that had once seemed like the worst possible outcome had become the catalyst for my greatest achievement. And the family relationships that had seemed irreparably damaged were slowly healing, evolving into something more authentic than before. As the last guests departed, and I prepared to lock up the center for the night, I paused in the main gallery, surrounded by the creative energy that filled the space. The path forward was clear now, in a way it had never been before. This was just the beginning of what was possible. If you found meaning in my story, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between following expectations and pursuing your passion? How did you handle family disapproval of your life choices? I would love to hear your experiences. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that their creative path is valid and valuable. Thank you for being part of this journey, and remember that sometimes the greatest opportunities come disguised as rejection.